comment section and on our YouTube channel, right? Also in the description panel. I'm going to ask my panelists for today to give their opening statements, beginning with Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Anotida, and thank you for inviting me to this important conversation. I mean, the topic of education and human development is very, very important to me. And I want to begin by actually evoking what Dr. Patience Mukwambo highlights is the role of education in her book. She highlights you know, both the individual as well as the benefits of the public good benefits of an educated population. And I believe that. I know that education is not the solution to all of our complex challenges as a country in Zimbabwe, but it does have a lot of merits. And this topic is also especially interesting to me in this context where we are battling a global pandemic, because I am concerned about COVID-19's disruption of an already fragile education system in our country. In fact, this crisis has reminded us of the essential role of education in human development. So for me, conversations and most importantly, actions around education are important to ensure the continued promotion of education opportunities for all. And I'm very excited to be on this panel with Brian and Irene, both of whom I have immense respect for how they have contributed to private and public education in Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire. Thank you for those opening remarks. Let me now get to invite Ireen Makirimani to give her opening remarks.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm super humbled to be together with this panel and this discussion on education. I think this is a very important conversation, not only because it will spark certain conversations in other networks, but it's also an opportunity to change thinking patterns, because I do believe human development is all about our thinking patterns. So I'm super excited and chuffed to be part of this panel, and I can't wait to hear what the other panelists have to say about what's happening in Zimbabwe, because I guess it's easier to look from the outside in, but when you're inside, sometimes it's hard to probably see what is going wrong. So I'm super excited to be having this conversation. Yes, thank you.
That is wonderful. Mr. Maregedze, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Anotida, and thank you, other panelists, for being in this wonderful conversation. And I'm sure having such important conversations about quality education, as well as issues that are to do with the way the education system in Zimbabwe is operating, is very crucial, as it helps us to deal with opportunities and challenges that the youth are facing, as they also try to come up with solutions in confronting the various socio-economic as well as political challenges in the country of Zimbabwe. So thank you for this opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Brian Maregedze, and thank you very much to Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire and to Irene for the opening remarks. Let us now get to start the discussion for the day. The questions that I do have for you today were submitted to our Facebook page, The Conversation with Anotida Chikumbu Book TV, by our esteemed audience. And I selected a list of 6 questions submitted by different people living and working in different parts of the world, but are interested in issues affecting the continent and affecting Zimbabwe in particular. So my first question goes to Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire Hokonya. And this question was submitted by Defense Muchazondida. Defense is based in Harare, and he wrote the following that I should ask one of the panelists. He wrote that as technology continues to infiltrate every area of our lives, the benefits of using technology in the classroom can no longer be denied. For example, using iPads and tablets can replace bulky textbooks, and smartphones can allow for quick research and access to educational apps. social media can provide an opportunity for increased parent-teacher communication and student activities. And monitoring services can be used to track the usage of technology, and technology can also be an important way for teachers to collect student data that can have a positive impact on learning outcomes. And in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, technology-enhanced learning has increasingly become a necessity for both the teachers and the learners. And the question that was submitted is that, is Zimbabwe ready to ardently adopt and effectively apply technology-enhanced learning in schools and in universities? Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire.
Thank you, Defense, for such a good question. It is a loaded question too, and my response to it will probably not be comprehensive in scope because there's a lot to say about education and technology as a topic, right? And it cannot be covered in a few minutes, but I do hope that our conversation here is ultimately sort of meant to complement other and expand on other conversations that are happening out there. But to answer the question directly, I would say, yes, Zimbabwe is ready to adopt technology-enhanced learning in schools and universities, so at all levels of education. The question is always on effectiveness, right? On the effective implementation of initiatives, given the economic and political challenges that we face as a country and that we've been facing for decades now. And of course, the impact on the larger impact on the education sector. So maybe let me try by qualifying why I think Zimbabwe is ready, and then we can talk about the real challenges on the ground. I will start with a recent example, actually. After the government of Zimbabwe announced the early closure of schools in March this year as a response to the corona outbreak, the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, I think together with the education cluster in Zimbabwe, they immediately went to work developing various strategies to support the continuity of education for students. And two of the main strategies that they actually worked on included the use of technology, one of them being education via radio programming, and then another was a digital and online learning strategy for those with access to computer devices and access to the internet. So the ministry has been receiving support to implement these different strategies from various partners, including UNESCO. And I know I have read that, you know, the Higher, what is it called? The Higher Life Foundation as well has also been providing support through an online platform called Ruzivo Online Learning Platform. I think that's what it's called. So yeah, I mean, this shows some commitment on the government side. There are many challenges, of course, and we can get into that, but that's the government. And then talking about the people of Zimbabwe, we have always been ready to adopt and effectively, you know, apply technology in different parts of our lives, as well as in learning activities. It is also important to note that there are many technology initiatives by the people of Zimbabwe right now that have happened and that continue to happen in the country at all levels of education. We may not hear much about them, or they may not be, you know, financially supported, but innovation in Zimbabwe has never waited on the government, and it has never stopped because we are in difficult or hard times. In fact, I think in many African countries, innovation strives during hard times, and that's what's happening in Zimbabwe. Last week, I recently read about a young man at St. George's. His name is Truman, I forget his last name, but he developed a WhatsApp chatbot called Zidzo Paden, and it's designed for students who take the ZimSec syllabi to, you know, they can access files and readings via WhatsApp. They can then download and, you know, look at the readings at a later stage. And even though there's a cost attached to WhatsApp bundles, I think, you know, it is arguably cheaper in Zimbabwe, at least to get WhatsApp bundles. So yeah, you know, it shows that we have the brains and the interest to create and adopt educational technology. And I'm sure my fellow panelists here are even more qualified to highlight, the specific challenges that we face in the country because they have real, field experience in education. But maybe before I finish, I just want to point to some of the immediate challenges that come to mind first. So if we talk about infrastructure, for example, and challenges in terms of access to the internet and connectivity, we know that not everyone in Zimbabwe has access to the internet to be able to use technology for educational purposes. In fact, a recent study by the EdTech Hub highlighted that 55% of primary schools have access to electricity and only 26% internet connectivity. So this is the reality we are living in, right? And also note that there are obviously disparities between rural and urban schools. If you look at the UZ right now, the UZ currently has a few students on campus because of the because of the pandemic, right? In terms of, because they are trying to curb the virus, of course. And students have access to Wi-Fi while on campus. But what happens when they are at, their different homes and then they lose access to that Wi-Fi, they cannot afford the data. I know currently they use it, I think, brokered a partnership or contract with the 3 main networks in Zimbabwe. So students can have access to a data bundle, I think, in order to access the ELMS, which is the learning management system at the university. But if you're in a remote place in Zimbabwe, how do you even access that bundle? And for other subject areas, can you imagine even if you have a smartphone, can you imagine trying to type a 2,000 word essay using your smartphone? So, there are real challenges related to that. And of course, lack of limited training and support to both students and instructors. Where technology is available, there also needs to be specific investments in terms of supporting that technology. If we send a bunch of tablets to a rural school in Zimbabwe, or even a school in the city in Zimbabwe, we cannot just leave that and hope for the best. I currently work in instructional education technology at the institution that I am at in the US. And even in a country like the United States with resources, you learn very quickly that an amazing professor who is an expert in their field, that necessarily does not translate at all to being a good instructor that can effectively deliver content using technology. So yeah, there are many real challenges we need to think about. Other indirect challenges are not paying our teachers fairly. That also affects using technology in learning. The cost of an iPad in reality is much more than what we pay our most experienced teachers in Zimbabwe. So yeah, I will end it here because I'll be interested in also learning from what the other panelists have to say later.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire Hokonya. Viewers and listeners, this was Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire Hokonya, who is with the College of Education at the University of Massachusetts Amherst in the United States. My second question goes to you, Mr. Brian Maregedze. I would like to reflect on the points that have been raised by Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire, but before we get to do that and before we get to come up with follow-up questions for her, I would like to bring you in, Mr. Brian Maregedze, with a question that was submitted here by Frederick Tsomba. Frederick Tsomba is in Kwekwe, and he submitted that since 2014, the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education in Zimbabwe has been embarking on a comprehensive curriculum reform, a process which is meant to enhance the quality of education in Zimbabwe. And a new competence-based curriculum framework was developed and finalized in 2015, whose first implementation commenced in 2017. but the Teachers Union of Zimbabwe has on several occasions reported that learners were grappling with the challenges of implementing the new curriculum. And parents and students themselves have also complained about this new curriculum in as much as the adoption and effective implementation of it is concerned. And the question that was submitted to our page and directed to you is that what would you consider to be the main obstacle to the effective implementation of the new curriculum? Is it the content or subject matter that the teachers are finding it difficult to teach, or the absence of resources to support the changes in the curriculum? Mr. Brian Maregedze.
Thank you for that interesting question. What I can say is that during the initial stages of the implementation of the during the initial stages of the can you come again?
Well, let me come again with the question. The question says that
I think I didn't get you.
Okay, the question says that what would you consider to be the main obstacle to the effective implementation of the new curriculum? Is it the content or the subject matter that the teachers are finding it difficult to teach, or the absence of resources to support the changes in the curriculum?
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me respond it like this. First of all, I think yes, there is equally the challenge of the subject matter, the problem of teachers, of course, finding it difficult to find the resources. We would find that in the initial stages, a number of people were ill-prepared, the teachers themselves. So there was this kind of top-down approach in terms of the implementation of the new curriculum, with the government coming up with the curriculum to the teachers or the educators. This was a challenge in the sense that a number of people were ill-prepared. And even the government itself was also not ready to deliver the necessary resources that are required. And I can assure you that as a resource person, we also had such challenges in terms of funding, especially in terms of preparing the material for the writing. Therefore, it ended up being a serious challenge. And this has been even worsened by the current challenge of the global pandemic of COVID-19, where we see that, yes, the issue of online platforms that are already being offered. If you check with the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education website, you'll see that they've uploaded a lot of material, which is very useful, which is actually commendable. But at the same time, the challenge of accessibility, who is able to access this information. And I would agree with the previous speaker that, yes, the issue of rural-urban divide still continues to be a serious challenge, because you do observe that even those who live in urban areas, they may not have enough resources to be able to have access to that same material. And you can see that relying on a mobile phone cannot be enough to be able to read, for instance. Because I've seen that for high school learners, you can see that if you check the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education website, there is a lot of content, be it notes that they have uploaded, which are very useful to learners. But the question now is, how many are able to access this material? So yes, there are steps which are being taken, but you may notice that it may not be playing a bigger part in addressing or in meeting the demands of the learners, as well as even the teachers, because if you look at the current economic situation, being able for every individual to be able to buy internet data, it's a bit expensive for the average person. Therefore, it also affects both the educators as well as even the learners, because they may not have the resources. therefore, the challenge becomes two-sided, with the subject matter. Where it is available, it's not reaching the relevant stakeholders. Where it is the relevant stakeholders have access, we end up having a class system where a few people have access to these resources. I think that's all for now.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much, Mr. Brian Maregedze. Viewers and listeners, this was Mr. Brian Maregedze. He has authored a number of textbooks that are used for teaching and learning in different high schools in Zimbabwe. And many of you may want to access them on his website and on his Facebook pages, which I'm also going to share in the comment sections right on this page and on our on our YouTube channel. I'd like to bring in Ireen Makirimani into the discussion with a question that was submitted by Hazel Magwenzi, and it's a question that has to deal with the public and private school debate, in as much as the kind of education that is provided in these two different sectors of schools is concerned. So the question that was submitted, it's twofold. There are two questions that were submitted, and the first one says, do private schools in Zimbabwe encourage a culture of Eurocentrism and whiteness? And the second question says that, has the private schooling system done anything to dismantle its colonial legacy?
Why did I get the hard question? Okay, so that's a very interesting question, and it has really sparked Twitter wars several times because it's a very sensitive one, apparently, when you look at it about, okay, private and public school. But I'm glad that I come in sitting in a position where I've experienced both schools. So I sort of have an understanding, and I've been working for a private school. So I have an understanding of what drives certain programs in a government school and what drives certain in a public school and then in a private school. So I guess my contribution towards this is more of a question and a posing to say, when you look at both schools, yes, it also has a lot to do with parents' affordability, to say, can a parent afford both a private, can they afford a private school? But when you look at the different missions that both schools are driving towards, it's still both education. Yes, it has been done in certain different ways and spectrums, but I definitely believe that both sectors, be it a private or a public school, are both trying to educate students, because again, I've been educated by both. But in the context of how are they trying to dismantle that, what I have to say is that, my contribution, okay, I know I'm trying to pick my words properly so that I do not start another war under the comment section. But I would like to emphasize that my view of education is exposure. So both schools are trying to educate, and both sectors are trying to expose students to a particular environment that they're exposed to. So you look at students that go to a government school, and when I went to a government school, my sort of the pathway that I was supposed to follow in life was sort of programmed around what public schools were offering. And then when you look at children that go to private schools, there's a different environment that they're being exposed to. So the introduction of two learning styles or two different content being driven in both schools, it will eventually strike some fingers to say, okay, why are we learning so much of that and they're not learning so much of that? So I feel like it's an exposure thing, that what is the school trying to expose? What is the government school public school trying to expose? And what is the private school trying to expose students towards, and preparing them for life after school eventually? So, can I say I know to what extent they've tried to dismantle? I think it's a vision and a goal thing to say, what are you trying to achieve when you go to a public school, and what are you trying to get your child exposed to when they go to a private sector? So it's a tough one, I have to admit, and I would really love to hear what the other panelists think, because being out there, you definitely experience something, being part of a public school and now being exposed to a working environment in the US. and what that has done to your understanding of what the US is all about. So I've always looked at it and said, okay, what are the schools trying to achieve? And are they achieving it? Are they preparing the child? Are they educating to better prepare the child for the environment that they're going to be exposed to? So yeah, that's my perspective in line with that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Irene. It's a pretty much very, very tricky debate, but it's very interesting that we've had the opportunity to have a discussion about it. But now, before we get to have a small discussion about that, I would just want to get back to Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire with a follow-up question on the earlier remarks that you gave with regards to the application of technology enhanced learning. I get the impression that there is a significant gulf between what you refer to as aspiration and reality. We do really aspire to move forward with strides that can assure the nation that we get access to technology enhanced learning, but the reality on the ground is something else. But now there is another issue that comes with this discussion of technology enhanced learning, that there is a study that was done recently by the Program for International Student Assessment that looked into the application of technology enhanced learning into high schools, and apparently a study carried out in 15-year-old students, largely in Europe, where many of these TELs were applied, so as to try and test the effectiveness of their application. And they came up with a conclusion that to some varying degree, the application of these technology enhanced learning sophisticated material to some varying degree affect student performance. And it is something that governments would really want to look into before they ardently adopt and effectively apply TEL, as we just recently discussed. And now the follow-up question is that at what stage of student learning should different sophisticated technologies be introduced? And what can the government of Zimbabwe do to reduce the chances of derailing student performance through technology enhanced learning?
Okay, thank you for that question. And before I move to providing a response to it, I want to challenge you, Anotida, to, I don't know, do another panel related to the question that Irene got at some point with other people, because I think the conversation of dismantling, you know, I don't know, colonialism or colonial legacies applies to both the private and the public schooling system in Zimbabwe. And I think it's another important conversation to have for sure. Also taking a look at even the curriculum in public schools in Zimbabwe. It will be really interesting to see what the sorts of colonial legacies we've carried through up to now and the impact as well. And then to answer the question, I mean, for educational purposes, I think technology can be introduced starting from very early stages. So including grade zeros in Zimbabwe. So early learners all the way up to tertiary and higher education. What is important is a thoughtful introduction of that technology, right? Because thoughtful introduction of technology can be used to engage learners and build key skills. For early learners, it can be integrated with play, and there is research that the skills that young learners get from using technology can also support future learning across all levels of education. So regardless of when technology is introduced in education, there are certain things or principles that should be taken into consideration. One of them, which is very important to me and dear to me, is the issue of accessibility. And it's accessibility in two ways. One is accessibility for all in terms of the technology itself. So thinking about whether students as well as their families and teachers too are able to have access to that technology, because you want to be able to avoid an increase in inequities that already exist. So whether it's an app or a tablet or digital book, can the government afford to supply that to all learners? Another accessibility thing that we often do not think about is the technology designed for all users, including students and teachers with various disabilities? So for example, I remember when I was at the UZ, at the University of Zimbabwe, there were a number of blind students on campus, or students with visual impairments, right? So questions to ask include, do we have assistive technology for that group of students when we introduce technology? And assistive technology includes things like screen readers, where the computer sort of reads out to you what you have on your screen. So if you have content uploaded on a university website, for example, or in a learning management platform, is it designed for people that need to use screen readers? In science and technology fields, for example, in biology, sometimes images with illustrations are very important. An image can be showing different parts of the heart, for example, right? And you want to make sure that that image has all the accessibility needs on it. For example, does the image have good alternative text on it? If a person with a visual impairment or who is blind is using a screen reader, are they not going to miss out on the important information that that image is showing? So yeah, issues to consider include the issue of accessibility and promoting equity for all, and not increasing gaps and derailing learning experiences of marginalized groups. It is important to think about technology in a way that actually reduces barriers and provides support and specific accommodations for all types of learners. There are also some issues that include teaching digital security and protection to learners, to teachers, to all instructors. There are many dangers out there on the online space that need to be considered as well. And of course, as I have already highlighted, there are a lot of things that happen beyond the availability of technology that are required to make it work, including the issue of power, internet, training, support. Brian has already alluded to some of these issues. And then just quickly, in terms of the second part of the question, what can the government do? We need the government to commit more financial resources, more funding to education infrastructure in general, into technology initiatives in particular. For example, universities may have access to Wi-Fi, like they use it, or to computers or iPads, but no funds to subscribe to these platforms. So they will not be able to, say, subscribe to platforms with new publications or current e-journals. So the availability of technology alone does not guarantee quality learning. So these are things that we should think about, and partnering with private organizations such as cell phone companies might be helpful to ensure both access in and outside of school spaces. And of course, the inescapable reality of the fact that a stable and thriving economic, social, and political environment is important.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire Hokonya, for that response. Let me now get to Mr. Brian Maregedze with a follow-up question on your earlier remarks. A critical issue that many observers have raised is that of changing the curriculum in teacher training programs and universities to produce quality teachers who can effectively implement the new curriculum in high schools. And the question is that what major changes should be made in the curriculum of higher and tertiary education and teacher training programs to produce a much more versatile breed of educators?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Anotida, for that. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
All right. I think this is a very important question, but you'd observe that I think from all angles, there should be a proper dialogue where those who are involved in teaching the educators, they should be consulted whenever there are changes to be implemented. So the experience that we have so far, it's more of a top-down approach where the educators, they are just, they find themselves with new programs, new names. Yes, there's no problem with naming, but we are saying they should be also involved in the planning stage or in the process of coming up with the new initiatives in such a way that whenever new programs come in, for instance, those who are, when they're looking at tertiary education, those who are at universities, they should be involved in a way that we need inclusivity. That's one. And I think it also reduces problems associated with circumstances where those who are supposed to implement now are surprised by certain names or certain titles that are now associated with programs that are being supposed to be taught at university level. This is a recent phenomenon, I think, that we saw that took some time in the middle, I think around June, July, where new programs were being advertised, especially I think in the University of Zimbabwe, as well as other institutions. So the issue is you'd find that those who are involved in implementing those new curriculum changes, a number of them were actually surprised. What is it that we are supposed to be teaching, or what is it that we are supposed to be delivering? And this also went on to, if we check primary and secondary education again, in as much as people were aware that there is going to be a new curriculum, the number of representatives, the number of people who were involved in coming up with this new curriculum, you would find that they perhaps maybe two teachers being picked at a district, and we are saying there is need for more involvement where all stakeholders, even parents, where they are supposed also to contribute in a way that it helps in the implementation stages, and you'd find that few problems would exist. Of course, not everyone can have a voice in terms of these curriculum changes, but you'd see that at least the majority of stakeholders, if they have a voice in a way that can be very constructive. So I think that helps to come up with a very versatile breed of educators, and above all is I think Dr. Nyaradzai has also mentioned the issue of financial resources to support the various initiatives. You would find that even those educators, they also need to be involved in training workshops, more training workshops that allow them to also to be hands-on on issues that have to do with new curriculum changes. So if there are no initiatives that are assisting them to be able to implement, it becomes a serious problem. And this also goes even to the educators who are at tertiary level again. They will resourced to be able to, do they have any funding that allows them to prepare for research, for instance? Do they have such platforms? It becomes a serious challenge. And you'd find that under the current situation that we have, they are already struggling to go to work. They do not have enough financial resources for their own survival. What about for the productive education system as a whole? Are they going to be able to contribute in a way that we have also learners who are going to be productive to the society as a whole? It becomes a serious challenge. So you'd find that these issues are also intertwined in a way that there should be a kind of dialogue that allows all stakeholders to be involved equally, rather than to have an imposed situation that we already have, where the majority of educators, they are just told what to do, what to implement. So if that situation is to be reversed, where there is inclusivity, both primary and secondary, as well as if in the tertiary system, the educators have to be involved, and these educators have to be financially supported in whatever steps that need to be undertaken. I think that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brian Maregedze. Thank you very much for that response. I do now have a follow-up question for Irene, but I guess we have lost here somehow. Maybe there's a problem with our connection, but let me get back to Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire. Are you still with us? Can you hear me?
I think I am all sorted now. I also had issues with my audio a few minutes ago. So unfortunately, I lost a lot of what Brian was talking about, but I think I'm good now.
Okay. No worries. I think we've just lost Irene on the connection. Maybe there's something going on, but we'll just wait and see if she'll be able to join us back. But I do have a follow-up question for you. Maybe if we can have shared thoughts on what we were supposed to discuss for this segment. The issue of private and public schools, the kind of education provided in these different types of schools in Zimbabwe has proved to be very, very different in terms of approach and in terms of the content that is dished in those schools. You find out that many parents feel comfortable with sacrificing their money to send their children to a private school because they know that that's where he or she is going to develop an English accent that is exciting to listen to as compared to what happens with public schools. They know that it's where he or she is going to have access to computers. That's where he or she is going to be taught French, to be taught Spanish, and so forth. And many of these schools have heard that they actually ban Shona. They do not teach Shona, some of them, and they do not even encourage communication within the schools in the Shona language. And many people feel that these private schools are not doing a good job in as much as promoting the culture, the tradition, the language of our country is concerned. So what do you think can be done to integrate both the public and private schools curriculum so that we can avoid these forms of stereotypes?
That's a really good question, Anotida. I don't have an answer to it. Unfortunately, I cannot provide a definitive response to it. It's a very complex issue, and I would defer, I guess, to, I don't know, people who deal with education policy in Zimbabwe to be the ones that can respond to this. Also, I'm not, because I didn't go to a private school, I'm not very conversant with actually what happens in private schooling systems. But again, this conversation heads back to the issue of colonial legacies, because one of the things you highlighted when you were asking this question was the issue of language, right? The dominance of language, of the English language, and how much value we place into the English language, how much value we place on accents. These are all colonial legacies, right, that we have to battle with. And this is not a challenge for Zimbabweans only. This is a very common challenge for all post-colonial states, post in courts, because that is always an issue of contention too, whether we are actually post-colonization, right, and the effects and legacies of it. But yeah, it's a conversation that requires, I think, more time and a more critical analysis of where we get these ideas. The reality, though, is the unfortunate reality, for example, is that being able to speak English, which is a colonial language, actually places you at it sort of lifts you in terms of status, right? So we cannot ignore the consequences of probably not having people being able to speak these colonial languages. But I think it's important to also have conversations about how we can value our own cultures, how we can value our own languages, and what we can do to actually have them be able to contribute to, you know, positive, to a positive status in our countries. I studied Shona in A-level, and I remember many people asking me, like, why Shona? What are you going to do with Shona? You know, and I enjoyed it very, very much. And again, you know, I haven't even answered your question because these are complex, critical issues. So yeah, that's all I have to say for now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Thank you very much, Dr. Nyaradzai Changamire. Mr. Brian Maregedze, let me also bring you in into this discussion of public and private schools. I'm sure that you have had the exposure of observing how it's done in both the private and the public school arena. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, thank you. This one is a very complex one, but I think what is important is how ready are we, you know, in terms of preparing for the implementation of these, for instance, the issue of language policies. Are we ready enough to, you know, support all the steps that we have? Because as far as we can stand, you can see that that aspect of decolonization towards the private school is still a problematic issue. We still have a long walk to that, because in as much as we may want to promote that, yes, with this new curriculum, I'm sure I've seen some, you know, the earlier stages within the first, is it a year or two, there was the issue of the national pledge, which you know uses the language of supporting the indigenous values, but to what extent has that been maintained? You'd see that those kids who were starting grade 1, grade 2, they were able to recite the national pledge, but at the moment, things are already changing. Our commitment towards making the new changes, I think, is also very crucial if you want to talk about the decolonization of all these issues. So you see that the English language may still remain for some time, you know, having such a I would say, superior position in courts, because even at tertiary level, these issues, yes, they are discussed, but in terms of the implementation part, it becomes a serious challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maregedze. We have now reached the end of our discussion. I'm very much happy to have had all of you for this discussion to talk about the topic quality in education as a tool for human development, enhancing teaching and learning in Zimbabwe. Viewers and listeners, this topic for this discussion is based on a book that was written by Dr. Patience Mokwambo, a book that was published by the Routledge, Taylor and Francis Group in 2019. A copy can be accessed on the link that I'm going to share on the comment section below, and also on the description panel right on our YouTube channel on the upload for this video that is going to be premiering in just a few minutes. I'm very much happy to have heard you, and I would like to invite you to like and follow the conversation on Facebook and on YouTube, and do not forget to subscribe. This is the platform where I get to sit with established academics, technocrats and international newsmakers to have a discussion of issues affecting the continent and issues affecting Zimbabwe in particular. I'm very much happy to have heard you, and have a good day.